Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in Mind.
Today's going to be an episode that this is a theme that we've kind of had, periodically, and I think it's important. We've talked about the fact that, and I joke that we're in the, we're in 2020 part 3.
Yep.
Hopefully at some point, we see some sense of normalcy, but we're still seeing the after effects, even if they aren't necessarily.
Well, we're not even in the, in all fair, we're still undebatably amidst the pandemic still.
They have not declared it endemic yet. So we are pandemic.
No. Yep.
And
it's
one
hard
of the
people.
Oh, it's very hard. And it's one of the first things that you and I noticed when we started going on Twitter is people are much more open and free in talking about their challenges and their struggles. And when they are up and when they are down. And I still remember going back earlier last year, Discovery season 4. I want to say it's episode 4.
That's what I think too.
It's we did an actual episode on this
Wilson Cruz's beautiful portrayal through Dr. Culber of psychotherapy.
And you'll hear us talk about it during the interview.
During the interview, yep.
Yeah. Did we talk about that during the interview? Maybe we didn't.
Oh, you know what? No, we kept talking with our guest afterwards. So we won't. But it's so apropos.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the highest volume visual tweets we had.
That's pretty mildly.
Yeah. Yes. Impression wise and everything. So again, Jason and I deal with data in different forms. This is not empirical data. This is more anecdotal. Smaller sample size. You can look at your analytics of each tweet. All I can tell you is, and Jason would agree, is that tweet skyrocketed in terms of views. So
and I think it bears repeating. Brad, you and I have intermittently talked about a ton off air, but in a number of episodes when we've just been talking, we've mentioned how important it is to welcome people to Dice in Mind to talk about through an educated stance the importance of mental health, because and that's where you're going, I think, right? Because we're in, like you said, we're in the 30th month of 2020 and people hurt, and even though there's like this new normal, maybe it's tough. Life can be difficult, but for the past few years there's so much angst out there, exacerbated by the pandemic and just making the things that were tougher. And you and I have wanted to get mental health professionals on the podcast. I think from day one.
And let it be clear, Jason has Jason has a clinical background. I have a business background, but we both believe this for very similar reasons. And I've been very open about the fact that I've had a number of years of therapy, because of stuff I dealt with growing up, everything. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not afraid to talk about it.
You're not, no one's ashamed to go into a physician to get a medication for like a boo-boo, for an owie. Why should you be ashamed to go into a different type of clinician for a different difficulty?
Way to take a serious conversation and make it sophomore by saying boo-boo and owie.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, my bad. My girls are going on 15 and 17, but I will forevermore call it going potty, and I can't get it out. You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
I just can't get it out of the system. I know. It's just how it is now.
Jokes aside, though, it is important for any of you, and for any of you who know others who may not listen, that I see it as I use technical terms. That's where I come from, as a consumer or an end user. Those that aren't in a clinical field even see this as well, that there's a need for it, and there's nothing wrong with looking for some help. And I think when you listen to, and I'll let Jason do the introduction, everything like that. When you listen to the interview today, it doesn't matter whether you are a psychologist or a clinician by background, or if you're not like me. There is important discussion that occurs here. And I want everyone, and I'll say this again afterwards, I want for those of us who aren't clinicians, if anything, to come out of this and say, okay, you know what? This is another example of where we are seeing creation of safe zones for people to look for assistance, guidance, help, just
like our
becoming
guest
healthier,
to helping them to thrive.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And if you're not interested in any of that, it's a really neat conversation, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
It's just such a fascinating application of tabletop role-playing games. And of course, that's what we are all about here on Dice and Mind. And that's also one of the reasons, it's the reason actually, that it's taken us so many episodes before we've had the good fortune to have someone like our guest this evening, that there are so few people doing this kind of work professionally. We really wanted to find someone who could speak well to that intersection of, let's talk about mental health, but let's do it through the lens of RPGs and how they can inform one another. And so I think you will hear in a moment with Dr. Megan Connell that she's doing that in fact she's gone beyond doing that. We're going to talk about her clinical work, her background, her upcoming book, and it's just whether you want to look at it from a mental health side or from a totally geeky RPG side. It's just really cool. It's like, Brad and I, you and I, we're talking every week about how RPGs can illuminate real life, can help us think through stuff, or sometimes we even talk about that when we record, but like, here's someone who's doing it in this just most elegant way where it's having
great point.
Measurable, real life positive implications. So yay for role-playing games. Yay for role-playing games making our society better because of their potential. So with that, we should probably just get to it because this is really cool. Dr. Megan Connell is a board-certified psychologist in private practice who formerly served in the U.S. Army. In her current work, she utilizes tabletop role-playing games as a clinical intervention. In 2017, she co-founded the media company Geeks Like Us, which focuses on geek and gaming culture. She is the author of the upcoming book Tabletop Role-Playing Therapy. She is a board member of Geek Therapeutics, a training platform that develops professional programs teaching the inclusion of games in clinical practices. Dr. Connell speaks nationally on the intersection of gaming and psychology and on geek culture. All right. Well, Megan, thank you so much for joining us. We've already had a really delightful chat before we clicked record. So at this point, everything else is just gravy. Brad's shaking his head, but he knows it's true. There are so many things we'd like to chat with you about, Megan, because you're doing such interesting work clinically and as a scholar. And Brad and I definitely want to focus on asking you about your upcoming book, but maybe you could introduce, for listeners who aren't familiar with your presence online and your presence professionally, you describe yourself as, boy, you've got it in different places online, you've got it in different ways, and they're all really enigmatic, really hooked us in as a therapeutic geek, all of them are just as a D&D therapist. What's that about, and why is that your thing?
Oh, that's an awesome question. I like that you led with that. So one of my big pieces of like who I am is being authentic. There's a lot of different schools on how psychologists should present themselves.
Right.
And, how I am in the room with my clients is obviously it's slightly different than how I am in the room with my friends or my family, but it's always me. It's not one of those times where it's like, oh, wow, you are so different than who I thought you were in this setting versus that setting. I wanted to be authentic to who I am. And I am a humongous fantasy geek and fantasy nerd. I love fantasy things and Marvel comics as well, and the MCU, and just that kind of escapism into these worlds where the actions of one person can save the world. And I love that. And there is so much of that I actually wanted to bring into therapy. And bringing together the geeky interests and ideas and stories, and to include tabletop role-playing games like D&D and everything, and then therapeutic intervention, it just was a natural fit. And when I started finding other psychologists who did this, who would talk about Star Wars and talk about how to use Luke Skywalker's journey as a metaphor for life, and to help guide you through making difficult decisions, I was like, yes, yes, please, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to do, and it's what is really important to me. And then getting into the gaming, I knew of several psychologists who are using video games therapeutically, but I was more interested in tabletop games. Now, I love video games. I just saw that there's this new video game, Stray, that I really want to lose myself into. It's about being a stray cat in a post-apocalyptic futuristic world filled with robots.
Oh, that's actually cool.
Yeah, I and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm into that. But I wanted, nobody was really doing anything with tabletop games in my area. I found a few people nationally, and connected with them, and have worked with them, and gotten actually to play D&D with them and do some other things. But it was something that I really wanted to push and bring my passion and bring good research to, and good literature, and do what I can to bring all of that together. So it's really just been a thing of if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way, kind of thing. And my way is geeky. It is super duper geeky.
You're speaking language that,
oh, seriously.
Yeah. I could see Jason, as soon as you were talking about metaphors, Luke Skywalker's journey through life, Jason's eyes just,
well, and I mean, I want to be, and to that point, Brad and Megan, I want to be clear. We're not going to talk about me, but as someone who is clinically trained, what you're talking about, I never saw anywhere. There was, I mean, literally, there was never a space for this in the discussion of training, in the discussion with professors in a clinical capacity. Maybe if I was working with a kid who was kind of geeky, I could use it to good effect, but there was no professional recognition of value at all. Did you experience the same thing?
Oh, yeah. So it was so dismissive. I remember I want to say it was a projective class or something. So projective measures are like the Rorschach test, where you look at something. It's like, tell me what you see in here. And we were reading the transcript of somebody being assessed, and it was a kid, and they were talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And it was really fascinating because the person who was assessing the kid had never seen the movie. And the kid was very accurately describing the baby in that movie. And if you don't remember, the baby smokes cigars and talks in a deep, gravelly voice. And it's supposed to be a dirty old man who's stuck in a baby body, essentially. And the kid's accurately describing this. And what's happening is we're reading through this report, and the psychologist is completely pathologizing it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, all of us in the class were like, this person's accurately describing this movie. All they're trying to share something they love with the psychologist. And this is how this kind of dovetails into one of the many hats I wear. Is I'm on the consultation committee for Layla and Geek Therapeutics. And it's a company I kind of helped, actually, I named it.
Yes, talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, with my friend Dr. Anthony Bean. And among other amazing psychologists and professionals. And we're really trying to push geekdom as a cultural competence. In psychology, one of the things that we are ethically bound to do is to seek cultural competency with the cultures that we work with.
Right.
And geek and gamers have their own language, their own social norms, their own ways of engaging. And it's very easy for professionals to pathologize that if they don't accurately understand it.
Yeah.
And there's a really big divide with gaming addiction, screen addictions, all of that kind of stuff, and trying to balance it. And that's one of the things that, we're really pushing with Geek Therapeutics, is talking about what is the culture, so often it's really interesting because my office has I have a Funko Pop problem, which I know this is an audio podcast, but I have Funkos behind me.
Yes.
My office is filled with them. I have Zelda posters up. I have all kinds of geek and gaming stuff up. And
funny.
I'll still have clients come in, and I'll ask what they're interested in. They're like, oh, video games, really quickly. I was like, oh, cool, what kind? And they're like, well, I don't want you to pathologize, it's like, I'm not addicted. I'm like, I didn't say you were. I love gaming, And let's talk about that. And so many people are afraid to talk about the things that they love and the things that are meaningful in their life because it's being over pathologized. And that's a really big problem. And I want to be clear, there are some people who have problems with it. Just like anything, too much of it's a bad thing, and people need to find balance. And there's some people who can't and have to recognize, like, I have a hard time with gaming or with limiting how much I engage with certain digital platforms or whatever. And that can be a problem. And then they need help with it. But not every gamer is addicted to games, so it's a really big thing to try and talk about that cultural competency piece and to help other providers learn what it is. And it's really fascinating to me that I don't know if arrogance is quite the right word for it, but dismissiveness maybe of some people in the field. Like, I had a professional email me for consultation saying that they wanted to use D&D in therapy. And I started talking about the different training programs that are out there. And they're like, oh, no, I don't want to learn. I'm not going to learn this. And I'm like, kind of got to. Like, you don't have to run the game, but you need to understand what the game is.
Right.
And anybody who plays tabletop role-playing games, it's a risk, right? Especially if you're getting into more of the heavy role-playing, it's like you are taking a risk. And if you're in a room where the most professional person in that room isn't willing to take a risk, nobody else in that room is going to take a risk. And so it's really vitally important. And that is something that I really think people need to understand in the field and work on and understand these cultural competencies so that they get it. It's not saying that, like, to work with people who identify as geeks and gamers, that you need to have watched, every single episode of Dragon Ball Z. But it's a good idea to have an idea of what the show's about.
Right.
Or to have an overview of, like, okay, I understand generally what tabletop role-playing games are.
Right.
I don't, you don't even have to play them. It's just like, oh, I've watched, 20 minutes of real life play on some sort of live stream or something. And just having that passing familiarity with it enough to ask some informed questions. And then on that ethical front, to know where to go to get more information.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah. Really interesting. So I'm curious, age range wise, I'm curious where you started, focused on kids or adolescents or adults or whatever, but then now, like what are the age ranges, or the age range where you really see this either being asked for or especially potent?
This might be surprising, but most age ranges, I work with folks generally 14 and up, though I do see a few younger folks going all the way into geriatric population. It's sort of interesting. The geriatric population don't identify as geeks, but when I make recommendations of, like, geeky films, especially to watch, a lot of times they will and really enjoy it and get a lot of stuff out of it.
Interesting.
But definitely lots of people in their midlife, huge geeks. And it's, one of the beautiful things about midlife is you stop apologizing for liking the things you like.
So true. You just nailed our podcast on the head. I mean, what are we even doing here? Yeah.
Well, and again, another hat that I wear is I'm a co-founder of a media company called Geeks Like Us. Right. And that's our tagline is just be unapologetically enthusiastic. And it's really interesting. Like, I catch myself sometimes I'm posting in our Discord and I'm wanting to be like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm geeking out. Then I'm like, nope, delete. We are unapologetic. I do not have to be sorry to be excited about something. I could just be super excited about the new Thor movie or Miss Marvel and how freaking cool it was. And it's just wonderful to have that stuff. And so it's really across the lifespan. And it's interesting, it's finding that common thread of conversation that you can speak through. So the style of therapy I do is called acceptance and commitment therapy, or abbreviated to ACT.
Sure.
And one of the cornerstones of ACT is speaking in metaphor, which is probably why I love it so much, because that's how I talk. And when I understand someone's geekdom, I know the metaphors to use. If somebody loves She-Ra, I've watched all those episodes. I could talk that through. I could be like, okay, so in this moment when Catra was doing this is kind of like what's going on here and how we can look at this. And it's really beautiful to have that shared language and that shared experience.
And so much geekdom, whatever it is a metaphor for real life. I mean, it's right. It's a reflection. It's a way to step back and I mean, right. The really good fantasy, the really good sci-fi, whatever, like you and I talk about this stuff, Brad, all the time, just off air of this is just real life playing itself through a different lens that allows us to entertain it more openly, more honestly.
Well, and one of the very cool things that I still freaking can't believe is my life, I actually got to meet and DM for one of my favorite authors. And in sort of a casual conversation, one of the things they said is they're very intentional with their books, because they're like, you know what we know is we're going to be showing the 3 worst days of this person's life.
Interesting.
And that's what this book is going to be, is the 3 worst days of this person's life. And they're going to go through stuff that we hope our readers never have to go through. But if our readers do have to go through it, this book is going to be a little bit of a roadmap of how they can survive it and what they can do to get through to the other side of it.
That's impressive writing.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God. I was like, because it was one of those things of those books for me had been a roadmap in a lot of ways. And I was like, you did that on purpose. It's so cool.
Wow. You've written a book.
I have.
So
I have an author page on Amazon. It's weird.
See, that is cool. Yeah. That is cool. And I will say that Jason and I have been talking about writing books for years. So every time we see something like that, it's very cool. If you don't mind, I'm not gonna dive into it because it's your book, but talk about what the genesis of you deciding to write and what you've written about.
Yeah. Well, so being at the forefront of we're calling it applied gaming. So it's what that means is like taking the games and playing them intentionally and bringing therapeutic themes into it. So when someone's talking about applied theater, applied music, applied gaming, that's what we're talking about, is utilizing those tools in effective ways for therapy. So I've been, one of the people at the pointy end of the spear of this, and taking a big risk to develop a new form of therapy. Yeah. And it's really been this interesting thing because there's no research. And that's such a weird thing. D&D was super duper popular in the 1980s, and people were playing it at community centers and with at-risk youth. Yeah. And nobody studied it, and nobody did randomized controlled studies, and video games got there's lots and lots and lots of studies on video games. Now there's a lot of theoretical papers on tabletop gaming, but there's no applied research. So this is really for all of us. So myself, the folks at the Bohana Group, the folks that came to grow, the folks at Aspiring Youth, like we've all taken a humongous risk to go, we're going to roll our dice and believe that tabletop gaming is an effective form of therapy. And we're going to try this, and we're going to figure out how to do it. None of us did it perfectly because there was no roadmap. Yeah. I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes DMing, just in learning how to DM and learning how to therapeutically DM. Like there's been a lot of mistakes. And so a lot of this book is essentially, don't do what I did sometimes. Nice. Here's the lessons learned, and here's how you can do this ethically. And one of the parts of the book that I am most proud of that the publishers agreed to keep in, at least at this time, is I have an appendix that is basically a cry for research, where I list out a bunch of different research questions I have, because I've been contacted by dozens of graduate students who want to study this and are having a hard time. Yeah. And so what those research questions are is it's hopefully a roadmap for those graduate students and their advisors to say like, okay, I can see where the research is starting from, and here's how we build upon it. And here's how we start to establish this as a potential intervention. And so the idea here is like reading this book isn't necessarily going to turn a therapist into a gaming therapist, but it gives them that roadmap on how they could get there. Yeah.
And who's the primary audience for this book?
It's written for clinicians. So it is written for those who are studying psychology or therapy, or are already licensed providers or working with licensed providers. That being said, though, I try to write the language of it in such a way that if you are just interested in why do these games make me feel so much? Why is it that I can have a game of D&D and I feel things that I don't feel in my day-to-day life, that I can feel more connected in that moment? And my hope is that this book can also shed some light for just the casual player who is wanting to understand why these games can be so impactful and what's happening, and why is it that you're learning stuff through playing, that by playing somebody with confidence, suddenly you're feeling more able to stand up for yourself. And how is that happening? Are those charisma scores really, superimposing onto you? Right. So it's again, it's more geared towards clinicians. I would say for those who are, not clinicians and wanting to read the book, skip the lit review chapter. You don't need it, but there's definitely some stuff in there that you're going to enjoy.
If I could, I'm notorious for sending us on sidebars when I think of something, so just bear with me. It's interesting when you were talking, what came to mind was how people were dealing with things during the pandemic at the worst of it. When we were all locked down. And obviously gaming, I mean, it was in the news, it was on, CBS Sunday Morning. It was something that had kind of really re-entered the zeitgeist, especially with all of us locked down. How did that play out with, I don't want to try to make this too nebulous, but in your work, and being general, obviously, in your work with folks, and then how it affected your writing when you were drafting this? How did that work for you?
It's a good question. I think, like, for me, one of the interesting things that happened during the pandemic was, like, I actually was gaming less because I ran my games face to face, and I had run some games. I did, my group switched virtual for the first part of the pandemic because we had to shut down when I was like week 6 out of 10 for my groups. And then I tried running a few online, and it didn't vibe the same way for me. I think one of the problems with that, something I noted for myself at least, was changes that I would see around week 6 in a face-to-face group, I was seeing at week 8 in an online group.
Interesting.
And so it was still happening. It was just happening slower. But what that did for me during the pandemic was it gave me more time to start really wanting to write and wanting to do this. I started this book in the October of 2021, and then I turned it in March of 2022. So just a few months ago.
So fast.
That's really fast. But it had been something percolating for a long time. And, like, I've been talking with lots of folks about the book. I had developed a training program that is through Geek Therapeutics. And I do a training program on my own as well, where I have people sign in and we do 10 weeks and I teach them what I know and what I've learned. And so I've had all those experiences. And so what this really was kind of taking, like, the practical work I've done, the teaching work I've done, the consultations and the lit reviews I had done to that point. And then it really funneled it all together and focused it in to get to this book.
And what's the title of the book so everyone can hear it?
Pull it up.
I was wondering if that was going to happen.
I know. Okay. So, fun thing I've learned, authors don't get to name their own books, especially new authors.
Okay.
Yep. We've heard that before. That's kind of a theme.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in writing and things that you learn through, like, I had all these assumptions in grad school when I was getting these books. And they're, oh my gosh. My theories were so bad, but that's another topic. It's a Tabletop Role-Playing Therapy, a guide for the clinician GM.
And it's coming out, it's anticipated by March of next year. Yes. It's on track to be done by March of next year. That's outstanding.
So
I'm just thinking too, as now I'm the non-clinician of the group. I'd like to think I'm honorary, but then Jason regularly reminds me how much of an idiot I am.
That's not a therapeutic thing to say.
I know. But we'll talk about that offline.
No, we won't.
But for those that aren't clinicians, I think it's important for them to hear that individuals like you are looking at this and looking at therapy from a gaming perspective. And I've been honest about this since the initial podcast. I've been through therapy. And so having individuals who can talk in that language, which is, again, like you said, unapologetic, I think it's also important for those that have listened here. Even if you're not a clinician, it's still fascinating to me, because as a consumer, for lack of a better term, I apologize, but they need to know that it's out there, and that, if you are struggling, I'm soapboxing here for a second. If you are struggling, you can do that in an environment that's unapologetic, just based off of the fact that it's so important to you. And you shouldn't feel like you have to hide it, like you said. So it just clicked with me, the idea of being unapologetic. I'm sorry, I'm hammering on that, but it's just, when you said that, it really resonated.
Yeah.
So.
And it's so important to have that space where you can just geek out about something. Like even somebody I was seeing today, we were geeking out about Miss Marvel and how much we both loved it. And we're just like, oh my God, and this part was so cool. And I'm like, oh, what does this mean for the future of the MCU? And just getting to have that place where they're able to be unapologetically enthusiastic, and they're not getting judged in a negative light. Right. Like we can't say they're not getting judged at all, because we're always judging. I'm judging them as being awesome. Right. That is still a judgment, but it's just this place where you can freely love something and not get not have to deal with gatekeeping, not have to deal with, just toxicity. It's just like, let's be excited about this thing. And this is so cool.
To circle back to something you said early on in this chat about, I'd just love to hear more about it. And it's based off of what you just suggested, Brad, or recognized. You had mentioned, Megan, that so much of this is about being, and you use better words than this, but culturally affirming, culturally normative, right? Recognizing being part of geek culture as a resource set.
Yes.
I wonder if you could say, because to me, that's what you're talking about, Brad, right? Being validated for being part of this, and then recognizing, like when you said, wow, I wonder if, maybe you can raise your charisma. It's like, well, my God, that's so metaphorically concrete. I know that's a tautology, but that's so cool. And I can see how with people that could so easily resonate and be validating when they're not getting it elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, and it is just so wonderful. Like I have another client I worked with, and they want to be a person who doesn't need to sleep, as many of us do. And they're a person who needs to sleep a little bit more. Like they probably need around, 10 hours as opposed to most people's 8. And they're really frustrated by this. But when they get those 10 hours, they are so effective with the other 14 they've got. And so, the thing that was said is like, you're a wizard. You want to be a bard. You really, really want to be a bard, but you're a wizard. Awesome. You need that long rest so you can change up your spells every day. Like you got to get that full long rest in. You're not a bard who can just kind of charm yourself through things. Like you need that rest. And like that was a phrase that just stuck with them, because they were doing something like, I wanted to go do this, but you know what? That's a bard thing, and I'm a wizard, and I got a wizard. That's me.
Nothing you just said is pathologizing or demoralizing. It's like everything you said there is healthy. Everything you said there is like, no matter how they perceive themselves as fitting in or not to what you just said, it's all encouraging. It's all supportive.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And I think that's the thing too, in like these stories, and like, finding those characters that we resonate with. One of the awesome things about doing a lit review, weird sentence, I never thought I would say.
I'm with you. Keep going.
Was one of the rabbit holes with the book, because there is no formalized research on tabletop role-playing games, it's just theoretical research. I had to do a lot of digging into tangential, adjacent kind of fields. And one of them is just studying literature. And so there's been studies on empathy and reading, that the more you read fiction, the better your empathy skills will be. And the more you identify with a character in the book, the greater that impact on your empathy is going to be. So my theory is like, okay, then if that's true in reading a book, most likely that's true at a tabletop role-playing game, right?
So I have to, I mean, no one can see us, but like I'm watching Brad's facial response to this, and like he knows I read almost exclusively nonfiction.
No, that's exactly.
And I can just see the.
No. I knew that's what you were thinking, and
that's why he's like a rock. He was never good in therapy.
No, because I know. Yes, you do read a lot of nonfiction. I tend to read a lot of fiction, but you do read fiction, and I think what Megan just said validates what I believe about you. And that is, you do have, even though you read a lot of nonfiction, you do mix. We just got done talking about this in prior episodes as to what you were reading. So not to digress from the topic, funny. I think it's just listening to that. It's funny how, I guess it just resonated with me, absolutely. And I hope it does with everyone listening is, listen to the value you can get from reading nonfiction, from having that shelf of Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms and Warcraft and whatever the case is. There's a positive to that, the positive of the time you spend doing that.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'd wear a lot of hats and do a lot of things. And so one of the things I'm really excited about in Geeks Like Us is I run the book club.
Oh,
and
cool.
I love epic fantasy, and I had started Kate Elliott's Crown of Stars series like when it was coming out in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then I started grad school. So then my time for reading fiction just went away. So we're going through that entire series in the book club, and it's so wonderful. But like, it is so fascinating to be reading about these characters who go through really difficult times and have to grapple with that, and it's really fun because my co-facilitator, and that is another psychologist, we both have a language-based learning disability too, which means neither of us can remember proper nouns, and we're trying to remember fantasy names. So it's terrible. That part is terrible. But we have so much fun, and we love these books so much. And you are learning about things, and you are thinking and like about how to grow. And it's like, God, how would I deal with this? What would I do were I in that situation? And I love how fantasy stories give us, survival and hope, right? There's so many times where it's like, oh, I would just die. It's like one of my kids was asking what it is like, what would you do if the zombie apocalypse happened? I was like, oh, die. I don't think I'd survive. Like, I'm not, no, that's not going to happen. But, really the human ability, our drive to survive and to thrive is incredible.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things to think about, like these worlds where, it was really difficult to survive, yet we found ways. And even in these fantasy worlds, that the different species adapted to live in their different settings and to adapt to the world around them, and to and that life finds a way, and that we just kind of continue on. It's really cool.
God, that's so well said. That so fits with the work you're doing. Okay, so I know, Brad, you're going to undoubtedly have more thoughts and questions, but I'm gonna ask.
No, go ahead.
I'm going to ask my last question, because every time I say my last question, then Brad barrages like 4 to 6 more. So I've learned.
I promise.
No, you should.
You can't. No, this is fun. This is fun.
This is so. I mean, there's so many more things I would love to just chat about with you, but I think for me, I'm curious, and I have to assume others are curious too. Let's put D&D, let's put wizards on the spot, because obviously that's the big one.
That's the big one. Yeah,
that's the big one. And I see online you're talking about it, and I'm assuming that's the one that's more your go-to than others. Is that a fair assumption?
It is, yes. And something I say in the book several times, because like it's not something I want people to be confused on. D&D is not the best system for therapy. There is no such thing as a best system for therapy. The best system, much like the best diet, is the one that works for you. Nice. I am familiar with D&D. I enjoy playing D&D. I know the rule set of D&D. I can, I've run games where I have zero prep. I just kind of know stuff, and I throw it together really quickly. I really would love to run Outbreak Undead and learn that system more, but I don't have time. And it's a more niche system, and getting people to want to play that is more difficult. So yeah, it's the go-to system, but again, it's not the best.
I mean, you're already taking me into my question. So D&D, because it's so familiar. I mean, my God, it's a golden age right now.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, just unofficially, of course, if they want to take your idea and then, pay you for it, that would be great.
That'd be amazing.
We've been hearing that's not how it works. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's yeah. But seriously then, Megan, if there could be a change or a set of changes to D&D, be it the mechanics or the kind of the gestalt of the worldview or whatever, what would you wish to see? Like if you just had a wish list, just one or a set of things that would really make it that much more therapeutically available in the work you do. What kind of things would you want to see done?
Well, so I'm going to take off the therapist hat to start off with this question and just have on my GM hat or DM hat for D&D. Fix the CR system. Oh my God, it's useless.
Oh yeah.
The challenge rating system. I mean, like you have to make encounters super deadly, especially if you have it that they're only really facing one thing per long rest. It's that system. It's like, it's either so bad or so like the game I play in, we fought a beholder when we were the appropriate level to fight a beholder, and it almost TPK'd us.
Wow.
That's kind of like the wisp that you got attacked by and almost died.
Yes, it's all relative.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So like that would be my ultimate big wish, because it does, like, you have to have quite a bit of experience running combat to get the right feel of how to challenge without killing and making it feel hopeless or a slog, because none of those are fun.
Also good ideas for therapy, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Therapeutically stuff, I want exploration better explored, no pun intended, I guess there, but wordplay there, because like there is so much that you can do with exploration and role play. Like role play obviously is going to be at the comfort of the GM, but finding ways to bring more exploration in, like more maps and mapping skills, like when I first started playing D&D back in the 90s was when I first started playing. We didn't have the maps. Everybody had grid paper, and the way the DM read stuff was you walk into a room that is 14 by 5 or like 15 by 10, and okay, let me put that, and then it's like, shoot, we went right. I need another piece of paper to tape onto this one. It was a lot of mapping. It was cool, but not so fun. So there needs to be something in there, because there's, like getting lost and finding your way when you're lost, I think is something that's really interesting. And that doesn't seem to happen to D&D characters anymore.
Interesting.
So I wonder, did you notice that, just out of curiosity, did you notice a shift in that? I suspect you played 4 in some form or another.
I did not play 4. I don't even know what set I played in middle school, because I didn't have the books. My DM had the books. And anytime we made character sheets, we got out, notebook paper, and we wrote everything out in pen or pencil. So I think it might've been 3, maybe, or 2.5. I don't know.
I mean, that's what I, when I was younger, when we played, that's what we played original Red Box. I guess that probably dates me to some extent, but for our age, I mean, for when we were young like that, we couldn't necessarily afford the books unless we got them as gifts. So that's how you learn to play. So house rules kind of became the rules, So,
but the exploration piece, therapeutically, it makes a lot of sense, right? Going back to projection, like you were talking about your class.
Yeah. And just getting people to explore and to figure out, like, because, what I see, there's a lot of different things that come up in therapy, obviously, and themes that you kind of see overall with the clients that you work with. And for so many people, like, they just kind of go, it's like, okay, I'm supposed to do this step and this step and this step and this step. And they don't know how to improvise outside of those steps. And like, they've never, like, we have a very safe world in a lot of ways now. Like when I was a kid, I was still part of that, like, just, like when my parents got sick of me, go outside, don't come back inside until it's dark. And it's like, we had woods out back of my house and I just went and played in the woods. You know, the thought of my kids going and doing that terrifies me now, you know, and, but I, you know, and like, even thinking of like when I went to the mall with my friends as a teenager, that again, before cell phones, and we said, okay, we're going to meet up at Orange Julius at 11. And then at 11, nobody's there. And then you got to be like, all right, oh, I bet they're all in this store. Let me go to the, you know, having to think that through and be like, where might they be?
And then you head over to the Sam Goody or the B Daltons.
Oh, you did it. You were trying to date it, but as soon as you said,
we're just going to call it what it is.
Yeah. As soon as she said Orange Julius, I knew you were going to try to come back and, you know, so
sorry.
No, but like that stuff I think is important. And like that, because that's also how we get wonder. I have not gotten this setting and book yet, so like it might be in there, but I wonder like how the Middle Earth campaign setting does this, because that's all what Middle Earth is, right? It's like
interesting,
you know, you're in the third age or the start of the fourth age really, and all this stuff from the second age is still around that's kind of been forgotten, and you go and you explore, and Middle Earth is defined by its history and its names, and finding like, oh, is this the lost city of, you know, that was founded by this, you know, one of the blue wizards or something. And, you know, so like, I feel like the Middle Earth system needs like really good exploration, because that's what it is.
That's funny you mention that too. I don't have it in front of me because I know the One Ring just came out. We just talked about this second edition and I just picked it up, and there was Adventures in Middle Earth a couple of years ago before they lost the license. And I've been talking to Jason about that idea of playing in that realm, just from a difference perspective. I mean, obviously wizardry and magic is different there than it is in traditional D&D. So you've been very gracious with your time and spending it with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. When your book comes out, I think it's in 2023, right?
Yeah,
that's
early
scheduled.
We would love to have you back.
Yes,
I'd love to. Yeah, this is great. Awesome. Oh my gosh, so much time has gone by, but it doesn't feel like
that's what. Once we get going, then we lose track of time. That's why we both kind of time keep. Otherwise, we'd go for hours.
Yeah.
So
this was just fascinating. Thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you.
All right, that was fascinating.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point that I failed to do so before the interview came on, and that is, you know, whether you look at this as a clinician, whether you look at this as someone who is always interested in seeing how people can find ways to get help, or if you're a geek and are looking at another ways and a gamer. And when you listen to Dr. Connell, you hear Megan talk about being unapologetic.
You beat me to it. Yep. Unapologetically enthusiastic.
Yes. So be unapologetically enthusiastic about how you're seeing our hobby translate into new areas that you wouldn't necessarily think would fit for it.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think, man, that's perfect. Okay, with that then, let's walk over for a brief GM corner, because at this point we're going long. What have you, what's on your table? What's on your screen? What's going on with you?
I've talked about the One Ring. Yeah. And I've talked about Torchbearer. I'm still working through those, so I can't tell you necessarily. We'll talk about those more when we have a little more time. This was we ran longer, and it's good we did. But for me, I'll be honest with you, what I've been focusing this past week on, and Jason knows this because I've been messaging him on music. So I think we've talked about it. I have a soundboard. I use products by a company called Novation. I have a soundboard, which we haven't implemented yet. And that reminds me, I need to work on that this weekend, because I want to be able to have the donkey sound I can push every time Jason talks. Exactly. But it wouldn't sound like that. But I tell Jason that I have, you heard Megan talk about music therapy or music. She mentioned it in passing a couple times.
Yeah.
Music is therapy for me. Plus, and Jason, I can't remember the term, and I normally do. It's late for me. My visual
synesthesia.
Thank you.
You're synesthetic. Yeah. When it comes to music,
I see colors. And I can't explain how without this running long, but there's some music that came out, and I won't get into it now.
Yeah, you were sending me that today, and
Yeah.
I could, no pun intended, I could totally see it.
Yeah, I'll send another time, but for me, it also got me playing some stuff related to that type of music with guitar. It's classic rock, folks, and on my keyboard, which I haven't done, and I haven't played piano, organ, keyboard type of stuff like traditional in a while. So that's me. It's really been focused on music this week. How about you?
Well, it's funny you say this, so I'm going to actually switch this a bit briefly, but I too, and I've been texting you about this too, so it's really apropos. I've slowly started returning to the piano. And you and I talked about this at the end of spring when I was offline, when I was saying to you, you being kind of my musical guru in the background, and then me saying, I don't know that I want to take lessons over the summer. It's been a few years, and you told me what your guitar teacher told you, which is sometimes you just got to take a break from it. And I've taken a break over the summer, and it's been good. And like, thank you, because you're reminding me is when we're done recording this evening, I will walk around in my office here, and I will go to the piano, and I will work on that little jazz piece that I'm trying to learn to work on sevenths. But that's not actually what I want to talk about. I'm going to take it a little lowbrow to wrap us up.
Shocker.
It is. This episode drops on August 15th. And looking ahead the rest of the month, and I know we're going to be talking about all of this much more in the coming several weeks ahead.
Yep.
But in the coming weeks, this month, in August, we are seeing returning to the television screen via streaming, season 3 of Star Trek Lower Decks, Star Wars Andor, and The One Ring.
Which all of them fascinate me. I'm very interested in seeing
that. Yeah. But I mean, so we have later this month, new Star Trek, new Star Wars, new Tolkien, which is, of course, the much of the lifeblood of early D&D. It's like, I mean, talk about a geek fest of a month. So there's a ton of stuff that we know, no matter what, will all be beautifully produced and hopefully well written. Like we're going to have to devote an episode to the new One Ring from Prime. I mean, you're going to explode if we don't. You're going to need to talk about it.
And I've piqued your interest enough. You may not have bought anything, but
the game.
Yeah. And again, I'll go back to it, folks. If you have any interest in Middle Earth gaming, at a minimum, pick up the starting kit, the starters game, because it is so beautifully done.
Yeah. Well, as you know, just like 2.5 hours ago, I ordered a D&D source book.
And a little less than 2.5 hours ago, I did the same thing after following you.
Right. Peer pressure for you is like a gentle breeze.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You should click. Okay.
Yeah. It's like talk about lowbrow. It's like a toot in the wind. How's that? I didn't use the actual term, but
yeah, that really adulted it up after all the owie discussion. So I think before we insult the intelligence of any more listeners,
you did that with boo-boos and owies. So I just had to wrap that with a bow.
Well, but look, the answer is tooting in the wind. So everybody, be well, stay well. We will see you next week.